Hey everyone, it's Phil Wade with Dalton Wade Real Estate Group, and this is a training on the company's office policies and procedures. This training should be conducted, watch this video, and then look at the company's office policies and procedures. So we're not going to talk about any business-related office policies and procedures. You can read those. They're fairly self-explanatory. Things like, drinking while you're working, drugs, smoking. I'm not going to cover any of those today, but what I am going to cover are the real estate related ones. These are real estate concepts that you studied when you took your real estate class, and also were tested on when you took your real estate exam. However, you only needed a 75 to get your real estate license, so possibly 25% of the concepts you didn't fully understand. These concepts we're going to talk about today are concepts that definitely come into play when they're out there working as a real estate agent, and I just want to make sure that everyone is on the same page as I am and as the company is. The first one we're going to talk about is agency. So there's three types of agency. There's a single agent, there's transaction broker, and then there's what's called a non-brokerage relationship with a client. The default that we always use at Dalton Wade is transaction broker. So if you're getting a listing, we are a transaction broker. And why do we do that? We do that really for a couple of reasons. One, it actually simplifies kind of the process. You remember when you took your course, they talked about transitioning from a single agent to a transaction broker. So anytime someone from Dalton Wade would show a property that's where we're a single agent, we have to have the client fill out that form. So again, that's one benefit of being a transaction broker, somewhat less paperwork. And then the other is that Agent A from Dalton Wade can be the listing agent, and Agent B from Dalton Wade can have the buyer. And since we're a transaction broker, we're able to do that, work both sides of the transaction. It also allows you as the listing agents to sell both sides. And in that case, and if there's someone from Dalton Wade, two different agents, we have to be neutral. And what I mean by that is we're not favoring one party, the seller, over the buyer. We're neutral towards both. And that's really kind of what a transaction broker is. Now, as a real estate agent, we understand what a transaction broker is, but many times the public does not really understand the difference between a single agent and a transaction broker. So even though we're functioning as a transaction broker, you as an agent, provided that we only have one side, either we're representing the seller or we're representing the buyer as a transaction broker, we need to be really representing them well. They expect that. And what do I mean by that? I mean that if you're working with a seller, you're trying to get them the highest possible price possible. If you're working with a buyer, you're trying to buy that house for as little as possible. That's kind of what the client will expect. One other thing to touch on as it relates to a transaction broker, even though you're a transaction broker, you still have limited confidentiality with your client. And where does this come into play? Where it comes into play, I cannot tell you the number of times I've heard agents, not Dalton Wade agents I hope, but agents from other firms say, oh, my client will take this, or my client will pay that. That's unacceptable, and you have limited confidentiality as a transaction broker. So if your client tells you what they'll pay, do not be telling the other side. That's knowledge only for you, and that again, you're not to be using sort of that information really against your client, because if you can purchase it for less, they'll be happy. Think of it like this: if your client knew you were sort of spilling the beans to the other side because they told you something in confidentiality, they're not going to be very happy. So even though you're a transaction broker, there still is confidentiality around what a client will take, a seller, and what a buyer will pay. So that's agency. The next one is fair housing. Fair housing today, many people are protected classes, and we have to treat everyone fairly. and equally. One of the big questions that comes up is, what do you think of this neighborhood? Now, sometimes you can give your comments, and your comments might be perceived as you're steering someone away from a particular neighborhood, or you're steering them towards a neighborhood, and that would be a violation of fair housing. Again, this is questions that come up. You know, you're the real estate agent, you're supposed to know the neighborhoods, people kind of assume that. My response to that question is, I hit it head on. There's a federal law called fair housing that doesn't allow real estate agents to comment on whether a neighborhood is good or bad, because it can be perceived as steering them either towards it or away from it, and that would be a violation. Again, this is not specific to fair housing, but we always want to be treating our clients as best as possible, doing what's right for them as opposed to potentially what's best for us. I'll give you two examples. I was working with two gay ladies. We ended up putting an offer in. The listing agent says they've got another offer, and to give our highest and best offer. We did that. I called the next day, said, where are we? She says, my client, and we had met the client. We had personally met the seller. They were there and showed us the house. So the listing agent says, oh, we're negotiating with the other party. And I told my client, and they basically got very upset because they thought they were being discriminated against because of their sexual orientation. Why are they negotiating with them and not us? So the listing agent did herself no favors. All she had to say was, we haven't made a decision, and when they had, she told us, you know, the other people had gotten it. Another thing that comes up around this, again, it's not fair housing, but a concept I want to make sure everyone understands, is when you do receive an offer or multiple offers, every single offer has to be presented. We've had situations where we knew the listing agent did not present our offer, more than likely because he had both sides of the deal. So he was looking out for his own interests as opposed to the interests of his client. Unacceptable. People, I don't, you know, you will not be working at Dalton Wade if that's how you conduct yourself. It's always for your client. You come second, the client comes first. And again, how did we find that out? We found it out by saying to the listing agent, forward us the email that you sent our offer to your client. Couldn't do it. And again, probably a violation of you know, the code of ethics. We didn't pursue it because the client didn't want to pursue it. Again, a little bit off the subject of fair housing, but you need to be conducting yourself in a way that really benefits your client. You have transparency, and your interests are, you know, your client's interests. So that's fair housing. If anyone has any additional questions, I'm happy to answer them. The next one we're going to chat about is legal compliance. That has to do with, if you move, you have to let FREC know. If your license is up for renewal and you need to take your continuing education or post-licensing education, that you do that. I do not monitor that. That is your responsibility. We have had agents, unfortunately, who let their license lapse. They get deactivated, they become inactive, and they're no longer able to sell real estate. No real estate activities whatsoever. So again, you're keeping your license current and keeping FREC informed of where you live is your responsibility. The next one we're going to chat about is showing protocol. So remember, we are in people's homes, and the utmost care and attention needs to be taken regarding that. So if you're the listing agent, you need to chat with your client about how you're going to show the home. If it's vacant, it's easy. You usually just can send the buyer along, confirm the appointment, let your client know it's happening so they know you're actually having some showings. But if they live there, you need to have it confirmed so that either they can open the door and step out, or they cannot be there when the person comes. So every appointment, has to be confirmed if you're the listing agent. Now, if you're the buyer's agent, unacceptable to just show up and go in a house, even if it's vacant. Every single time you enter a house, you have to have confirmation that it's okay to do so. No exceptions whatsoever. Conducting an open house, very similar. You have to, have approval from your client, the seller, to conduct the open house. You have to let them know what time that's happening. And you need to get there at least 15 minutes prior to the start of the open house so you're set up and ready to go. Oftentimes, I've been waiting with a buyer client, and the person conducting the open house rolls in, right at the moment it's to start. They're all disorganized, and really, open houses are a great source of buyer leads, but that person isn't really presenting themselves in a way that anybody would want to work with them. So you need to be there early. You need to be set up so that when the buyers come in, you're putting your best foot forward. RESPA. RESPA is the Real Estate Settlement Procedures Act. That has to do with taking kickbacks. Those are illegal and unacceptable. As a real estate agent, you're at the beginning of the transaction. What do I mean by that? Well, until that property goes under agreement, nothing else happens. There's no involvement of a title company, there's no involvement of a lender, and the Real Estate Settlement Procedures Act has to do with kickbacks, money back to the agent for recommending either a title company or a mortgage company. So that each time, a transaction closes, you recommended someone and then they gave you a $250 gift certificate or something of value. That is illegal and unacceptable at Dalton Wade. Now, referring professionals, good professionals that we know do a good job, there is nothing wrong with that, because in the end, that will make your life a lot easier. If you're working, and primarily we'll talk about on the lending side, if your client is potentially working with someone that and we'll kind of categorize all the big banks in this bucket. And certainly there's times where they do a great job, but there are also times where they're not able to deliver on time, they're not able to close the loan when they said they would, and all that does is put your transaction at risk, because when you have to start asking the seller for extensions, they get nervous, they don't have to grant you those extensions, and your deal can fall apart. So you might want your client to work with a lender that you've worked with and delivers 100% of the time on time. Now, you can make that recommendation, but at the end of that recommendation, you should say, but it's up to you. It's the client's choice. You made the recommendation because it's probably better for all that they work with your lender as opposed to someone else, but it is the client's choice. So that's RESPA. So again, no kickbacks, but recommendations certainly fine. The next one we're going to talk about is antitrust. Antitrust has to do with the commissions that we earn or we get. And this is one that many times agents don't have the concepts right. So the concept is this: there is competition among real estate brokerages in terms of what they charge. Now, you've gone on a listing presentation, you've told them what you think the house is worth and all the great stuff you're going to do for them, and then they say to you, well, and then you tell them what you're going to charge. We charge 3%, 6%, we keep 3%, we give to the buyer's agent 3%. If we find a buyer ourselves, we'll charge you 4.5%. You'll save a little bit, and you'll make a little bit more as an agent, as there is more work. And then the potential lister says to you, well, how did you come up with those amounts? How did you come up with that commission percentage? So the answer is it's based on the work we do. So there is a lot of work in selling a home, and our commissions are directly attributable to the work we do. But what they're not attributable to, and these are the bad words that can get us in trouble, is prevailing rate. What we're charging is the prevailing rate, or what we're charging is the going rate, or the standard rate, or the market rate. Anything that gives the impression to that seller that commissions are not competitive and that everybody charges the same amount. That would be a violation of the antitrust laws and would subject us to some fairly significant fines. So it's based on the work we do. Make sure you understand that concept. The next one we're going to talk about is the lead paint disclosure. Again, very important, you know, for health reasons for children under the age of 6. The protocol is that if you're getting a listing and the house is built before 1978 and before, you're going to have the seller fill out the lead paint disclosure. You're going to give them the lead paint pamphlet so that they know what their responsibilities are, and then you're going to take that disclosure and you're going to put it up online, so when a buyer submits an offer, their buyer's agent is going to be able to have them fill that out, and then we're all compliant. If you're working with a buyer and you go online, you're ready to submit an offer, and there is no lead paint, the lead paint disclosure, the listing agent on the other side didn't do a good job. They're not a Dalton Wade agent. They either forgot, didn't do it, didn't upload it. But again, the idea is that the seller has to fill it out first, because the seller has to tell the buyer what they know about lead paint in that home. So many times, and again it's incorrectly done, the buyer will fill out the lead paint disclosure first and then the seller. If you're audited, we're audited, that comes with a fairly significant fine. So always the seller completes it first, the buyer completes it next, and it does need to be done in conjunction with you know, the residential contract, no exceptions. The property disclosure. The property disclosure, again, is something that the listing agent should have filled out. It's our firm policy that anytime we take a listing, the seller's disclosure is completed. Many times, or sometimes, people may be flipping a house or have never lived in the house, but that does not get them off their obligation to disclose any type of material defect in the home that's not readily visible. And the property disclosure helps do that. It helps, you know, those type of things come out. The other thing it does is it actually helps by telling the buyer what the seller knows about the house. In most cases, if not all cases, there's going to be a home inspection, and that home inspector is probably going to uncover that issue. Now, all that does to the buyer is raise questions. Oh, why didn't they tell me this? That's a question on the seller's disclosure. What else are they hiding from me? And it sort of puts both parties in kind of almost an adversarial relationship. So again, you know, filling out the seller's disclosure if you're a listing agent, having your buyer and yourself, if you're the buyer's agent, review it. You know, very, very important, and something that we always need in our files. The next one is our escrow account policy. So when you take you're a new agent and you take your real estate course and your test, they talk about the broker, get the check to the broker within, you know, 1 day, and then the broker has to deposit the check within 3 days, and there's this whole reconciliation that needs to be kept so that, you know, all those escrow funds are properly accounted for. Well, in practice, no brokerage, or very, very few brokerages actually have an escrow account. The escrow deposit is always given to the title company in 99% of the cases, and we're going to get into the, you know, the contract in a bit, in another module, but the standard default is that check has to be at the escrow company within 3 days, and then you're compliant. So if you can have your client deliver the check, I'll save you some time. Your client might wire the money, or as a courtesy, you might drop off the check, you know, to the title company. But it has to be there within the amount of days specified in the contract, or you're in breach of contract, and, you know, the seller can, you know, basically terminate you. All the forms we use are in Form Simplicity, which is part of your MLS subscription. There's a link there. And those forms are the forms we use. There's a form for every possible situation and transaction. Now those forms have been approved by the Florida Realtor Association, the Florida Bar Association, and they're not to be changed. They've made it so that it's basically fill in the blank or check the boxes. So there's no changing the verbiage on these contracts in these forms. The other place is Transaction Desk, where you can actually do the transaction, complete the forms. There's a program called Authentisign through Transaction Desk that allows you to use the electronic signature capability. And at this point with technology, most clients expect to be electronically signing documents. It's all fine. It saves everybody a lot of time. You're not like schlepping over to the client to have them sign it, scanning it, and sending it on. It's all done electronically, and it works great. The next one is the Dalton Wade Buyer Acknowledgement. Is a document. It's a disclosure. It's not a contract. That anytime we're working with a buyer, you need to have that completed. And it basically tells the buyer what our responsibilities are and what their responsibilities are, so that there can be no confusion as to who's doing what and such. So that's a disclosure. It's not a contract. And as I said, it lays out what we're responsible for, how we're representing them, and what their responsibilities are. In terms of compliance as a broker or brokerage, we're required to keep all documents for 3 years. We do that through a software program called BrokerMint, where you upload all your transactions into it. We review them, approve them, and then ultimately close them out. There will be another module specifically talking about BrokerMint. So that's the office policies and procedures. If you have any questions, just give me a call or email, and I'm happy to go through any of the concepts in more detail with you. Thank you.